You'll make sure I won't. Let's go to page 3, please, and you can have a look at that. Councillor Wells, then Height.
The very first item, the Integrity Commissioner Service, just for clarification, so if people are listening, I think I understand it correctly, this is the mandatory program that we must engage in. Am I correct on that?
CAO.
To council, to all of council, that is correct. The Municipal Act has been amended. We are now statutorily obligated, or we will be statutorily obligated to have an integrity commissioner. We are attempting to be slightly ahead of the curve to have everything in place before that piece gets enacted next calendar year. So to have that in place late this year and running and operating smoothly. So we have a little bit of flexibility on timing, but we have no flexibility on the fact that it has to happen, and they are costs that will have to be incurred.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, just a supplementary question while I have the county manager here. I looked at $30,000. Is that going to be the full costing, or is that just for part-time, or could you just explain where the $30,000?
Certainly, my pleasure. And for the record, you've had some reporting on that from our county clerk. You will receive more in very short order, in fact, reports that are mostly written as we speak. That said, $30,000 is a guess, and we need a placeholder number. It is an item that when the Integrity Commissioner is in place, staff will have zero control over. Two items. Firstly, you as councillors will now have a statutory right to ask questions as to whether or not you have conflicts on given files of that Integrity Commissioner, and you can make those calls as you wish, and there'll be a fee for that service that the municipality will pay for, but of course we have no control over whether or not you feel you need to seek that advice. And then secondly, the Integrity Commissioner would, in theory, become involved in complaints or allegations brought as against yourselves, and we have no good way of predicting that, and so we're just neutrally putting in on the one hand, I'd like to assume it's $0. But that's an item over which we have no direct control. So 30,000 seemed reasonable in light of the experience at other municipalities, but you could say 10 and you could say 50. It'll only get spent when those services are utilized.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This will be the last question I have on this. Where will this person be situated? Or will he or she, sorry, be a county employee?
The report will provide you with options, but it is impossible to envision a world where the person has to be external to us. They can't be dependent upon the guiding mind for both the paycheck and then make judgments upon you, frankly. So they need some independence, which means they need to be external. It is quite common to hire lawyers or workplace investigators and or people who are both to conduct this type of work. It would be the result of an RFP, a competitive process, and we would find someone who would fit Norfolk's needs. They'd be retained, but we'd only spend money on them when we utilize their services, and we just hope that it never comes to that.
Thank you. I have Height, Sonnenberg, and Brunton in that order.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I have 3 on this page. The first one is the financial services student. This is an accounting clerk student for financial services.
Page 3, sorry.
I'm wondering if the treasurer could explain what the need is for this.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Height. Currently, finance does not have a student in its division. We did have a student, I believe it was at least 4 or 5 years ago, and we've had there's 3 of our current staff held a student position with Norfolk County, and they're excellent staff that we have currently. And from a succession planning point of view, and to try to have recruitment for the finance division, having a student is a huge benefit for us. And to add to that, I've worked with students before in previous municipalities, and they bring an excellent atmosphere to the division and the departments, and it creates more energy and creativity and things of that nature. Also, to bring a student in, I don't like saying this, however, there is a lot of vacation time that happens, and a student greatly helps when in the summer months when there's a lot of vacation being done. I don't like that being the only reason to bring in a student, because a student is there to learn, and a student is there to appreciate what a municipality is, and then a lot of times those same students end up having a career in a municipality. So that's the reason why we put a student in there, not just for the workload reason, but for other reasons as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess what I was looking for in this report, and I didn't see it, is a way to address the asset management plan. Norfolk County has one. It's not in the capital budget and forecast according to that plan, and yet I don't see us addressing it again this year. I don't think it's capable of a student. Why wouldn't you look for a professional at this point?
Mr. Cripps?
If I may, the reason, there sort of a twofold reason for that item not being included. Firstly, we have a cutoff date that, is 2 months back or so for items to be included in this budget, and we just couldn't get that work done in time to have it included. Secondly, this council will be receiving a report from my office in 2 to 3 weeks' time, specifically a series of 2 reports on that topic. They're being worked on by a variety of your senior staff as a coalition. So you will be hearing specifically on the question of asset management planning and staffing in relatively short order. We're quite far along into that, but we couldn't get it time-wise into this budget. So details to follow. I'm sorry, I know that's a little gray, but that's where we're at.
Thank you for that. I feel it's very important. That plan was done in 2015, the first 3 sections, and by the time we get around to it, it's going to be old data, and we'll be right back where we started again. My next one, Mr. Mayor, would be the finance clerk of social services and housing. It says here we're looking to add a temporary full-time FTE, and the cost on it's only $23,200. Maybe Ms. Miranda needs to hire us, the clerk, to do the asset management plan at those costs. How come it's so low?
Through the chair to Councillor Height, there's some funding contributions from the respective ministry, and there's recoveries from Haldeman as well, hence the lower cost.
So could it be set to 0?
Through the chair, no, it can't. We have to match some of those fundings from an administrative perspective, is my understanding, so it couldn't get to a 0.
Is this the 75% funded by the ministry business?
Through the chair, no, it's 50-50 with administration from social services.
Okay, 50-50, thank you. And then my last question has to do with the Norfolk Urban Renewal Partnership. Mr. Baird, can you explain to me that business?
Through the mayor, thanks, Councillor Height. Back when we were preparing the budget, we anticipated an announcement from OMAFRA on some funding opportunities, the Rural Economic Development, the RED program, to help downtown renewal. We didn't know all the details of it, but we wanted to make sure that we had a placeholder in the budget so that you would have the opportunity to discuss it. Ironically, the announcement was made by the minister yesterday at, I'm sorry, what was the conference? It was the Roma.
Roma?
Yeah, correct, thank you. And Norfolk County has been identified to receive $82,000 plus or minus, but that would be matching dollars. So this is the intent here. This would be the matching dollar. It's not quite 50,000, isn't 82, but we would go to our chambers and our BIA partners and look at maybe funding that gap so we could maximize that grant. And that program would be developed once we saw the details behind it and each of the downtown needs. So it's the first of multi-year, we understand. So that's what that's for.
Okay, so really what you're saying, we need 82,000, we got 50,000. You're hoping that the BIAs and chambers do. Shouldn't we just increase that right now?
Through the chair, I think, Mr. Mayor, that would be one option for sure. But I think in the spirit of doing these downtowns that we would really look to those business partners to come to the table, have a bit of skin in the game. It could be in kind, but I think we're comfortable going forward at this point. We obviously don't want to leave any money on the table, but it certainly is manageable if you look at the other 5 or 6 downtowns that would be able to participate.
Okay, and when does the grant expire, or when do we have to have all 82,000 to match their funds?
The announcement was just made yesterday. Our staff are busy digesting all the requirements. We'll likely be bringing a report back to you that will explain how it's going to work and what our plans are. So I understand it's in place for the year, and again, it would maybe available for future years as well. Depends on the uptake. It lists, there are 444 municipalities. Not all are eligible to participate, but there's a considerable number on that list. Whether they all choose to tap into that or whether there's remaining funds, we're not sure how that works. But we will get all that background and report back before we even initiate that program.
Just to be clear, it was 82,000 even, or 82.5? What was that? number?
$82,575.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I just got a phone call at break from Minister McGarry herself confirming that.
Okay.
We are
Thanks,
getting
Mayor Luke.
that. So that was good news. Yes, on this, yeah.
The procedural, Mr. Mayor, is it your intention that we're going to go through each of these sections individually, so we'll see the budget detail for each one, or how do you want it? We're just doing the summary pages now.
Well, I recognize that this what we're going through, these first pages, and Councillor Brunton probably owe you an apology, because obviously the first thing is the county solicitor position, but I was thinking we were going to deal with it on page 9 where it's got the rationale or the justification. So we probably, technically if I was a little smarter, I probably would have started on page 8. I assume that everything that's on the council-approved initiatives is, everything on the summary is in the backup pages, I would think, in detail, correct? That's correct. So I probably got started off on the wrong page myself, and I apologize to Councilor Brunton. Probably should go to it by department, not the summary. Mr. Johnson, what do you think?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With this year's budget presentation, we put the council-approved initiative, council-approved initiatives have already been debated. It's a quick thing to go through. However, the new budget initiatives is where we wanted to spend a good amount of time going through, because that represents change in service. That represents the non-status quo, if you will. And I'm not sure as far as the logistics, but I would suggest going through line by line to make sure that council agrees with them, with the new budget initiatives. And then if you want more details on those specific initiatives, the more detailed pages are included in that package.
So stay right on the course?
Yes,
Okay.
and the intent is to spend more time on these pages, and then once we get to the divisions and the departments, that's the status quo area where it's business as usual, and hopefully we can fly through those.
Anything further, Councillor Height? I will now go to Councillor Sonnenberg, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I could go back to page 2, please. I know we decided that we would deal with the Board of Health questions later under another tab, but if I might ask my question now, it'll give Marlene a chance to come back with the answers later.
Go ahead.
Okay. Under the Tobacco Enforcement Officer, I want to know how many people we now have employed in that program, and what the total cost is, and how we measure the effectiveness of the program. You know, I drive up and down the streets of our county and I see scads of high school students out on the street smoking. That hasn't changed, so I'm just wondering how effective this program is. If she could address that later on, please. Thank you.
We're going to leave that with Marlene to respond later. And when we get to the Board of Health, certainly the FTEs will be listed there as well, but your question is a good one. Councillor Brunton, Oliver, and Geisens.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I just want a bit of clarification, and I know all these can be talked about, but the council-approved initiatives, James, and the new budget initiatives, are they in the budget now, or are they out?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Brunton, they are in the budget. right now. All these initiatives, everything listed here is in the 3.3%.
Okay, so with the council approve, and I go back to somewhat the health issues, I know there's many of these we've looked at, and there's funding available and so forth, but I want to go to the new initiatives for a minute. So if I'm reading this right, go to page 5 at the summary. I'm just going to, the total, subtotal without the Board of Health is $583,000. I'm assuming is in the budget now, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, first of all, just a small correction with my earlier statement. Anything that's on page, the category 4s. They're at the back of the, so there is a page at the back of the book where we call them category 4s, and those are the cuts that we made. So that's later on. I just wanted to point that out. Now, to answer your question, the 583,400 would be the annualized amount. However, because there are some new budget initiatives that won't be started until
Right.
later on, so it's prorated, and so the actual impact is 526,200.
Okay, and that's in the levy now in our documents,
That's correct. So if you were to use, I'll use myself as an example, I'm asking for a student. If you go to the finance tab, you'll see a column there for new budget initiatives, and the cost for the student is there.
Well, I'm going to ask you this question in a different way. If I go on page 5 at the bottom, where it says permanent full-time dental assistant, right down to 566,200 net levy impact. If I said to you today, cut all that out, am I talking about a 3.5 to 3/4% cut in the tax levy? Is that what I'm talking about?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Brunton, yes, you are correct. If council were to decide to eliminate all the new budget initiatives based on that total, then we would make an adjustment on your monitors
And
for
that- the total-
566,000.
And that's about what, you said 800,000 is 1%?
It's about, yeah, it'd be about 3/4%.
3/4%, thank you.
And what that equates into that screen, perhaps we can do a little trial run, and Chris can put in that reduction in there, and don't read into that, anybody. This is just a trial, and then you should be able to see on that screen how it flows through.
Can we get that on our screens? Can we put that on our screens, Chris? Can we put that on this screen?
To answer your question, we wanted to keep, there's two separate systems, so we wanted to keep that there. So the answer is no.
You're not trying to hide that on me, are you?
Can you see that okay?
Well, no, you can't. It's kind of...
Do you want to move over there? There's lots of seating
No,
over
that's
here. No,
fine.
you're okay? All right. But feel free to get up and wander that way from time to time, Councillor Brunn.
So you can see right now, it's already done. Chris Everett's to my left, he put in that adjustment, and that adjustment is on the screen, the monitors in front of you, and the screen behind Mr. Cribbs, you can see the far right column changed to 2.7% or $5.88 a month from and the second last column to the right is where we're started at, so the 3.3 or the
Okay.
Thank you.
Lots of graphs. So I'm going to continue the speakers. Anything from pages 1 to 5, with the exception of the Board of Health. We'll deal with those later. I have Oliver Geisens in Columbus, please.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Again, my question relates to one of the detailed pages further in this document, so I don't know whether...
Go
you want
ahead.
me-
Let's do that. If you
Okay.
got a question here, let's do that.
I do. It's on page 34 of this document, and it is the new budget initiative around the Port Dover West Secondary Plan. It's identified in the justification that this is a $350,000 exercise, but it's only showing a net levy impact in 2018 of $35,000. And the reason why is because all of the rest of the money is coming out of a reserve or reserve fund. My question that I scribbled at home and that I'll ask now is, what is the status of that reserve that we're going to take this $315,000 out of? Is it in the black or the red, and if so, how much?
Mr. Mayor, if I could just jump in and give Kathy a moment to maybe dig that up. This is from development charges, so it's quite healthy.
Okay.
And we're only able to apply 90% of the expense because this is a growth-related study. We're only allowed to fund 90% of those studies with development charge, and so the remaining 10, that's why there's a difference. There's a residual that carries over. And in terms of the health of that account, I'd defer to finance for perhaps a comment.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if you can give us about 5 minutes, we can get that number for you
Okay.
accurately.
Thank you. That's the only one right now, Mr. Mayor. but-
Okay, I'm going to continue. Councillor Geisens, I'll get to you, Doug.
Thank you. I want to understand what's going on here. I'm looking at, it doesn't matter, I'm on page 4 where we started, and basically what we're talking about here, it doesn't matter which one it is. We have some that have an impact, a levy impact, but there are no net levy impact. So what does that, how does that work out? Do you go to the next one and it's 58,900 and there is an impact, a levy impact. So what is the difference between those two?
James?
Through the chair, I may be able to answer that question. James is looking through that information. Through the chair to Councillor Geisens, I believe you're looking at the inclusion support team item on page 4?
Correct?
Yes. In a full year, the impact would be $58,900. This year, staffer, it'll be calculated out to $49,700. And the fact is, because we're going through budgets today, by the time the job gets posted and in position, we're looking at March or April, so it's prorated for the first year.
And why is there no net levy impact on the very top of that page for $60,000, but yet there is a levy impact? I don't know what the difference is.
If you read those columns left to right, your first and third columns are dollars, the second and fourth are FTE impacts. Yeah, so usually, if I may, okay, you got it, sorry. And it is confusing until you kind of think this through. Thank you, Councillor Geisens, Councillor Columbus, and then Broughton.
Yep, one of my questions was answered, but I do have another one, and it's with respect to the bottom of page 4. Additional weeks for leaf and yard waste pickup, there's brackets around that 26,700. We're increasing the service, but there's brackets around the number. I need some clarification on that.
Yeah, Lee, good contract? Don't know.
Through the mayor to council, with respect to that, it's correct. It's actually a savings by increasing the service. As it currently stands now, we have received requests for multiple years to extend it. As a result, we started doing some curbside studies of the material that was going out, and we've estimated that approximately 600 cubic meters, 600 tons of material is being shipped to Brampton and incinerated. If we actually spend a little bit of money and actually collect that waste for a longer period of time, that will actually all be addressed locally and stayed out of that stream, whereas that stream's more expensive to treat. And so we're actually going to be saving money because that stuff won't be being sent to Brantford. So that's the net savings that we'll actually achieve by increasing the level of service. It's really a good news story for us from a budget point of view.
Double negative turned positive.
And Councillor Columbus, you've had the same problem that I had going through this. If on this item you went to page 56, it gives you the rationale for where the 26,000 and change savings is, and that's the difficulty. I think this is kind of a new format. Yeah, on this, go ahead.
Same item, Mr. Mayor, thanks.
Sure.
And I understood Lee's rationale, but Lee, will we not be paying our contractor that does our leaf and yard waste cleanups for an extra week or 3 weeks or whatever it is? I mean, I understand the savings on costs going to Brampton to our energy from waste, but aren't you going to be paying the leaf and yard waste contractor more?
Through the mayor to council, this is the net savings that we're going to see.
That is a net saving.
That's the net savings that we're going to see.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Broughton, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Going back to Councillor Oliver's question about the Port Dover West, whatever we call it, and I lost the page already, but I guess my question on that is that I think I know the area, and I'm looking at that, and I know Mr. Baird said it was funded out of that reserve fund, but if those lands are going to develop, why wouldn't we ask the developer to do the study? Why do we pay for it?
Through the mayor, it's identified within our Lakeshore Secondary Plan as a growth area. There's been a lot of speculation on that. This is for council's benefit. This is the section of land north of Radical Road, south of Highway 6, within the Port Dover urban boundary. So there's great development potential in that area. As part of that, for staff to be able to accept development applications on that, the county needs to undertake a number of studies. Firstly, to understand, do we have the capacity, water, sewer, wastewater, stormwater, how the transportation network will work, function, all the necessary studies, how the existing infrastructure can accommodate this growth. And the county can take the lead, a developer could take the lead, or it could be done in partnership. And this is what is being proposed at this point. Generally, the county, in the perfect world, the developer would pay everything up front and they would do the studies that the county would request of them. But this is such a large area and it will have such a major impact on Port Dover and the county's future, that it's prudent that the county be in, not necessarily the driver's seat, but being a co-pilot as well. My staff have been working with Lee Robinson and her team, and we've been talking to land purchasers and developers on that. And this is kind of critical at this point. It's something we would normally do to get more development ready, which is something that I know this council and previous councils have always held in high regard, more shovel ready. And we're at that point now. So we need to be proactive and anticipate this growth that's on the horizon.
How many farms?
In terms of land parcels, I believe there are approximately 4 major land parcels in varying degrees of acquisition.
And do you know, like, have you spoke with the owners? Like, are they aware of this? Like,
yeah, we're working with all the owners
Yeah.
and potential developers on this. We've had discussions already. I can't get into the details at this point, but certainly there's great interest there.
and they're not willing to ante up as of this point?
I'm sorry, I should answer your question. The county is taking the lead role, but we are fully expecting those developers, they're in the business to make a profit, that they will also be contributing towards the study and its outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
Lee, a question I have is the second one up from the bottom on page 4, the consultant to do the sign, I'll call it an inventory, I guess, and the detail I'm looking at on page 55 in the justification, it's a $110,000 item. Lee, could you just remind me how important this is? And I certainly have read the backup, so I know there's a lot more than simply Mr. Cribbs and I going for a drive down our concessions, and he counts one side and I count the other. Do you want to just, how important this is to get this completed? Because I think it's something that could be deferred, but I want to hear from you first.
Certainly, through the mayor to council. The purpose of this is we have a plethora of roadside signs all over the place. Some are regulatory and some are not. The regulatory ones need to comply with provincial legislation. It requires that they have a certain reflectivity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We don't currently have a current inventory of the actual physical location of our signs, what they are, et cetera. It does put us in a little bit of a difficult position when we're trying to defend ourselves in lawsuits, et cetera. And as you know, we're currently faced with multiple lawsuits as a result of vehicular incidences that occur, et cetera. It allows us to comply with the provincial regulations that we need to comply with. The intention of undertaking this study is to document all of that information. This is actually going to be done by a vehicle driving around. They can actually do it and digitize it all. They can do it considerably cheaper and faster. We did an estimate of if we hired a student, it was to input all of the information and do that. It was going to cost us in the neighborhood of $250,000 to $300,000 to do this. Through the wonders of computers, they have the technology to be able to do this and capture all of that information for us, provide it in a layer so that we have that. It'll put us in a much better position. should council wish to defer it, it's certainly something that could be deferred. That being said, one lawsuit where we're held liable, we're in the $2, $3, $4, $5 million range. This is a sort of an investment in saving us money in the future. But certainly, should it be absolutely required, we could defer it for a year. There's no current provincial legislation that requires that it be implemented in 2018.
So you're looking at this, you've answered my question very well because you've touched on the safety aspect and the making sure that we have proper signage. Should there be a serious accident, we've got a better chance of saying, looking for anything out there that might leave us in serious concerns.
That's correct.
Okay, I got it. Thank you. Councillor Wells and Brunton, please.
Just a quick question, and I'm sure there's a quick answer. With regard to the fire training officer, it says to continue the training officer program, and I see the net levy impact is of 1. Could we just have a little explanation of that, Mr. Mayor? Is this a new position, or old position, or are we making it permanent? Those sorts of questions.
Mr. Cridlin?
Through the chair to Councillor Wells, yes, the fire training officer was put in temporarily last year, and funding was secured through the existing budget using different training opportunities having in-house. There were cost savings. So what staff are asking for now, no additional funds tied to this position, but this position would become a permanent training officer, not a temporary one, which we'd have to come back to each year to ask for approval of.
When you say no additional funding, how could that be?
Staff, through the chair to Councillor Wells. Last year, fire staff as well as finance staff went through the budget, and obviously in fire services training is a #1 priority. So they were able to come up with training that was done out of house, different circumstances. By doing that in-house, there was a savings, and that savings goes towards the wages of this officer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Brunton, please.
Sorry, Mayor Luke, just going back to that Public Works, the reflective data. Last week we spoke about LiDAR at the Conservation Authority, and I've also spoken with staff, and I've been following this fairly close, and I understand that we may have LiDAR by the end of the year for all of Norfolk County. So I think that's very important.
Okay.
That's a possibility from what I've been told, so thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Any further questions on anything under new initiatives? Mr. Johnson, please. No, sorry.
Okay, so I can hear myself now. So regarding Councillor Oliver's question on the reserve used for that study, it is a development charges reserve. It's called the General Government Development Charge Obligatory Reserve Fund, and it's used to fund growth-related capital projects related to general government, of course. The 2016 audited balance is approximately $200,000, and the 10-year capital forecast that we have for that same reserve is approximately $310,000. And now that doesn't include this project. We haven't factored that in yet. So technically it would be in the red if we were to fund this project. However, having said that, this project also isn't included in our DC fees. And we are currently engaged in the development charges review, and we will add this project in those fees. So that will change the 10-year forecast for the revenues for this reserve.
Anything further? Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Just going back to that, the sign, I don't know, the picture taking of all the signs and such as that. It says here that the request needed is a legislated, and yet it's an SLT priority ranking #3. So when I go to page 6 at the very beginning, it says if it is legislated or mandatory, then it's a rank 1. So can somebody clear that up for me?
Please.
Councillor, we struggled with this one around the table because we were running into the the limits of our definitions. A really strong part of our motivation to recommend this to you to this year is the liability, are the liability implications. And so that's not directly from statute, right? That comes from an exposure and really leads to a number that we can never quantify. We can't prove to you we're going to avoid a lawsuit or successfully defend one until years from now. We do know that we don't have an inventory of where our signs are. And to the extent we have those signs, I can't tell you which stop signs or which speed limit signs are no longer statutorily that are 30 years old and don't look like they should now or aren't reflective enough. So one of the goals of this would be to create a database, create a data set that we can manipulate and track and use in future purposes. But right now, I can't tell you if we do or don't. None of us can tell you if we have stop signs where we should, if they're good enough. I mean, I use stop sign because it's such a vivid example, but that goes for any type of road sign. So we struggled around the law piece and how to rank this one. It just didn't fit perfectly in any box. We think there's a good business case, and we think we'd be a much more efficient operation if we had this information and data. That said, as Ms. Robinson has very candidly said, if you find it necessary, we could defer this by a year. We do need to do it, and it will enormously behoove the corporation, but we also can't look you in the eye and say it absolutely has to be this year, and therein lay our dilemma.
You're accepting motions right now, Mr. Mayor?
Anytime during the budget session's a motion, but it will need a seconder as well as a mover.
I'll move the motion that we defer this for 1 year. If it's not legislated, great. If not, I hope this will give us some time. I know that we were doing a review of all the speed limits in the towns and hamlets and such, and maybe this can be pieced in with that, and hoping that comes sooner rather than later. I've been waiting a long time for that one. But that's the motion I'm moving, Mr. Mayor.
I have a mover. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Columbus?
So I'm seconding it. Can I speak to it, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, you may.
Yeah, I was looking at this too, and, you know, this is just to study the situation. It doesn't include the findings where we may have to replace even more than $100,000 worth of signs. So it's just the beginning of something. And I just wondered to Mr. Cribbs, will our insurance rates drop significantly if we go through this process? Being that we'd be looking at reducing our liability.
The first part of the question, I'll defer to Ms. Robinson, but the second, I can tell you that if there's litigation as against the Corporation of Norfolk County, in which we cannot successfully defend because we didn't have a yield sign where we should have, or the yield sign was inadequate, that will result in payment of monies which will increase our insurance rates. So I can answer the question in the negative. There's certainly, in theory, a lot of potential exposure there. As to savings, I can't make that promise, but that is exactly the sort of thing we take to our insurance company when we negotiate future increases, and that's one of those due diligence things we can show, which does, in theory, allow us to occasionally negotiate reductions. So can I promise it'll go down? No. Is that something we would lead with? Absolutely it is. That would be sort of Exhibit A. Ms. Robinson does have some information to convey.
Ms. Robinson?
Thank you.
Through the mayor to council, this amount does not include the replacement of signs. The signs have to be replaced whether or not I do the study. So right now we have staff that have to go out to check all of the reflectivity on all of our signs. So we're already undertaking all of that. The intention of the study is to come up with a systematic replacement of signs over the life expectancy of a sign. And this will, so it's going to be a one-time study. It's not something we're going to have to keep doing. If we do this, it actually, at the end of the day, to do one of the reflectivity tests, it's incredibly expensive per sign, and municipalities have now chosen to actually replace signs rather than do these fancy reflectivity tests that can be done on them, because it's actually cheaper to replace the sign than it is to do that after a certain period of time. The idea was to come up with a systematic thing. If we have a sign that doesn't currently meet legislation, we have to replace it now anyway, so there isn't going to be an increase in the amount of signs that we have to replace. It's still the same number, but it's going to give us a much better, more efficient way of replacing the signs at the end of the day.
Thank you.
To the motion, Mr. Sonnenberg, please.
Thank you. To me, this is a safety and a liability issue. It has to be done eventually, so I'm not going to be supporting the deferral. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Black?
Ditto.
Councillor Brunton?
I guess if we get the LiDAR information and it's not just, LiDAR is going to help a lot of other things, not just this type of project. I guess my question to Lee is, if we hold off, Lee, for a year and we do get LiDAR for the whole county, would it be beneficial to you in other areas?
Through the mayor to council, it sort of, the LiDAR that we have the potential, it's great information. It's going to be great information, but it's not going to pick up sign information. So it's going to sort of be the underlying information of the sign, and we're very excited and hopeful that we do get it because it'll be incredibly beneficial to the municipality to have that information. But in terms of what that's going to capture, it's not going to capture this kind of information that the study would capture.
But is it a possibility that this information could be provided at a cheaper rate once it's all flown, I guess, the whole county?
Through the mayor to council, no, it will not result in any cost savings as a result of this. This is basically the picture underneath. So the LiDAR is like the picture underneath, and what the study is locating the signs on the picture. So the LiDAR will provide background information that goes underneath it, but it won't do any cost savings with respect to the project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? And Councillor Columbus, the motion is to defer this? Defer it? Yes. Yes. You seconded it. Yes. Okay, page 4, second from the bottom, that levy item of $110,000 on the data collection project for sign inventory, reflectivity. The motion is to remove it from this year. Any further discussion? Those in favor of the motion? 1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed? That is carried. So that item will be back in for next year's consideration. Councillor Brunton, further?
Just on this whole new budget initiatives, we can come back to that at a later date.
You can come back at the end of the budget
Thank you.
session to deal with any one of these items in this.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Oliver, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question that's kind of along the same line. I'm looking at the bottom of, in 2 spots, I'm looking at the bottom of page 2, first of all, where these are the council-approved initiatives that we have already dealt with and equate to about 13 new FTEs, if I'm correct. I think
Yes.
staff will concur. And then at the bottom of page 5, the new budget initiatives that we've been sort of jumping around on here this morning will result this year in almost a 7 FTE equivalent increase over and above the 13. Is that correct? I.e. 6.69 net FTE for 2018, and once it's annualized, it'll actually be 8.9 or 9 new positions above what we've already approved.
Kathy? Sorry, we need your microphone again.
Through the chair to Councillor Oliver, yeah, that's correct.
I'm just bringing my colleagues' attention to that.
Yes,
that
it is.
That's 7 more positions this year, which will annualize in 2019 to 9 more positions if all of these new budget initiatives are just kind of, I mean, they're all good things, no question about it, but that's a lot in my view, Mr. Chair.
And if I may, I would think out of those are not, I think four of those in the Board of Health as well are included in those, in that total, I think roughly. Well, there's 2.8 on page 2, and then there's 1.82 on page 5. But again, I'm just asking the question. I don't know for sure. Marlene?
That is correct.
That's correct. So 4.6 are FTEs in the Board of Health, much. But your point is, you're right on. Yeah, it is significant. Anything else on these new initiatives for now? Councillor Wells and then Height, please.
A quick question. I think you have the answer, and you've told us this repeatedly, but again, it's important to repeat it. At the end of the budget session, we can come back after and decide if we wish to revisit any item. Am I correct?
When we finish the council operating budget before the bylaw is passed, I will ask, is there any other items you wish to revisit? Because sometimes you have to go through every department and then look at the big picture. I'll do the same thing for the Board of Health before we pass in the Board of Health meeting as well. Absolutely. So make your notes, and you still get a second kick. Anything else on the initiatives? Councillor Oliver, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm wanting Mr. Cridlin to give us some more detail on this inclusion support team. I mean, we've always had our AODA program, and that staff member has always, with the committee, addressed the needs of our requirement to meet AODA standards, et cetera. But here we're proposing 1.2 new FTEs, one of which would be a permanent FTE, part-time at least.
Middle of page 4. Sorry,
yeah,
Jim.
middle of page
Thank
4.
you.
I'm not sure where the detailed is further in the document, Mr. Mayor, but we can go to it, or he will for us. And almost $59,000 annualized levy requirement for this. I'm not personally sure that this is something that I can support at this point, and I'd like some more clarification as to why staff feel this. Is it mandated, or are we just being proactive?
It's page 44 on the justification. Mr. Cridlin?
To the Chair, to Councillor Oliver. Before I do a brief talk, I want to introduce Susie Ray, the program community program supervisor. I've asked Susie to be here today for this topic. She has a wealth of knowledge. She lives and breathes this. So I think I can start it off that society has changed. We have a number of members in our society who in the past have been limited from attending such things as county programs, the county pool, and there's, the Human Rights Tribunal, I believe it was the city of Cambridge, got themselves in some hot water by not having a program in place. What staff are finding are that individuals with special needs, if I can say that, are increasing. They want to be part of our programming, and we're not adequately staffed. Our staff don't have the training to assist with a lot of these. And what this program is asking for, we're not asking for a whole new division. We're asking for a permanent part-time coordinator who will work with school boards to see the number of children that may come in, other associations that deal with these children, and as well put these programs together. The other thing with the students is this need is not only to summer camps. It's year-round through our pool and aquatics. So the students would be a floating element of this when the need exists. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Susie, who can hopefully add a little more detail to this.
Thank you through the Mayor to Councillor Oliver, and thanks for the introduction, Bill. You're right, Councillor Oliver. We do currently right now have an accessibility and compliance officer in place for the county who's a tremendous resource. And through building this new business initiative, we've had a lot of communication back and forth to try to put a business case together to really justify, to present to you folks. It's really tough to measure quality of life from just a numbers standpoint. We've done some research to know the number of offerings we have available, the number of participants who've approached to come to program, who've actually attended programs, who require support. And it's a growing trend. I can say from a corporation standpoint, to mitigate liability and potential human rights issues or litigation, it's in our best interest to consider this. I think we're getting ahead of the curve with accessibility, but also catching up a wee bit too. So currently, as it stands right now, we have a bunch of professionals within our recreation team who offer quality, accessible, affordable recreation offerings, but we need to broaden our depth of knowledge in this regard. So although we have some staff who have graduated recreation and leisure programs, some who are early childhood educators, we don't have that real depth of knowledge in coordinating accessible and developmentally appropriate and physically accessible programs as well. So that's what we're asking for here, is to be able to help those folks that come to our programs who have an identified need, whether it's a child or an adult, through recreation programs or aquatic offerings, to be able to identify their need, address their need properly, have that staff person in-house who has that knowledge and expertise to help lead some training for our staff. So we have consistent messaging through our accessibility and compliance and customer service supervisor, through our department and CSD, to really have a benefit, a real impact on quality of life, and keeping our high quality in our service for our recreation programs paramount through CSD. There's true value in this. It certainly isn't a passing fad with folks who require accessible recreation. It's only increasing. It's a matter of time whether we're proactive or reactive to putting staff in place to mitigate negative experiences or open us up to litigation, perhaps. Thank you.
Don't know, 10 minutes? Yes, Councillor Brunton, please.
I'm on to a couple other things in here. Is that
Well,
okay?
let me just see if there's any more questions on this item. If you don't mind, then I'll go right to you. Councillor Oliver, please.
Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much, Susie and Bill, for that response. I guess my final question to you, Susie, is how seriously, if at all, did your department consider just training up one of our existing recreation staff rather than creating another whole new 1.2 FTE equivalent position for this?
Thank you, Councillor Oliver, and through the Mayor. Our staff are at capacity as it is, and we do diversify in our skills. We've got staff who are skilled in fitness instruction, like I said, early childhood educators and whatnot. And currently, our business model is right now through our training. We do bring external agencies in, but it can be sometimes somewhat of a perishable skill. If we have someone on site who's trained, lives and breathes this, and really injects the importance of inclusion and accessibility throughout our program, and it's still the heartbeat, but it's really embedded in all of our program planning and service delivery. There are measurable benefits. The City of Guelph's realized this through implementing inclusion support staff. The City of Cambridge has, City of Barrie. There's also positive impacts on revenue generation as well. It's hard to measure the number of folks who've come to us and have had, it's easy to measure the number of folks who've come to us and had really positive experiences because they're thankful. It's the thank you cards, it's the parents that hug you and are crying because their kids have had wonderful experiences. We can't measure the number of folks who don't come because they don't think we have the supports in place. I think Bill would like to speak to the revenue as well.
No, one point I don't think Susie and I brought out is if you're on page 44 of the document, which is basically the details on this, there is a revenue side of this of $12,500, which will be appreciated or immediately with the need. This number in future years, as we get out to more of these people that need this services, that will increase because obviously when you have more people in your programming, you're bringing more revenue in. So it's a fluctuating number on that too. Back to Susie.
Just to add to Bill's comment too, currently our model right now, if we have folks who need one-on-one support, our current ratio right now within our day camp programming is 1 to 15. We try to hold a 1 to 10 ratio to really maintain a high quality standard in our programming. If we have a participant come to our program who requires one-to-one support, we provide that support to that child. So that takes 14 other potential offerings, which does reduce our revenue. If we have a plan in place proactively to meet with those parents, identify the need, assign staff who are trained, a lot of our staff truly are high school students who come, they're compassionate, they're great kids, they're true leaders in the community. They just don't have that training unless it's from someone who comes into staff training a week ahead of the summer for a couple hours. It'd be really neat to have this ongoing through the year so we can have consistency in our service delivery, increase our revenue, and increase our service level as well. Thank you.
On this item still, Councillor Wells and then Height, and then I'll get to you, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for that explanation. You did extremely well, and I certainly appreciate it. Just a quick question. Are there any government grants to help offset these special needs that we have in our facilities?
Thank you, and through the mayor, I think this is what we're constantly working on through Shelley's department as well, working with Sam, is identifying needs not only through infrastructure, which is key, but the social service side of it as well. So we're actively seeking opportunities to offset our labor costs, but we haven't, as of right now, been able to identify any until hopefully this new business initiative is agreed upon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Height?
Mayor Luke, I'm going to move the motion that we defer this for 1 year.
Do I have a seconder to the motion to defer this for 1 year? Councillor Geisens has seconded. The motion is up for debate on the floor. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Wells, please.
The question to Councillor Height, what would be the advantage of deferring this for 1 year?
Well, Mayor Luke, I don't want to delete it in its entirety, but I don't feel that there's a solid enough business case on this particular project to move forward for me to allow it to move forward, or I won't support it. I certainly won't. Thank you.
Further discussion? You've heard the motion to defer this from this year to another year. Those in favor of the motion to remove this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those opposed? That is carried. So that item is removed from this year's budget. Councillor Brunn, thank you for your patience. You're on.
Thank you very much. Just a little bit of information here. I'm on page 4. It says Tri-County Pros Hockey School. No money, no staff. I like that kind of stuff. Why is it in here? Is it somebody renting the ice? Is that all it is? Like, as long as they pay their way.
Mr. Cridlin?
Through the chair to Councillor Brunton, you're exactly right. I'm flipping through here. We presently offer a program, and it is cost neutral. The fees from what the children pay cover off the county costs. However, last year there was a lineup of hockey players we had to turn down. So what staff are seeing, by extending this another week, I believe we can incorporate another 40 kids and just bring a program that introduces kids to hockey, you know, by these professionals, and just expand our program for no extra dollars to the taxpayer.
That's great. Thank you. My last two is
Yes, go ahead.
to Lee. Lee, you got 2 in here, the tipping fee study and the lead sheet on page 5. And again, I have no problem with them. No money, no staff. Am I reading that right?
Through the mayor to council, that's correct.
Thank you.
Anything else? Nothing further at this time for new budget initiatives? Councillor Height?
Mr. Mayor, I wasn't sure if you were finishing with the book. Is that what you're about to do?
Well, what I'd
here?
like to do is, shortly we'll have lunch, but I'd like to finish up with the book before we move to the tabs department. But you got anything else on the initiatives?
Well, it's kind of a combination. There's
Go ahead. Go
three
ahead.
different ones in here from forestry, and I'm wondering if Mr. Cridlin can expand on it. There's a $60,000, it's all over the place in this book. So there's a $60,000 tree planting initiative to replace the ash trees, and then later on, there's 2 canceled ones from SLT where they were looking for a pickup truck so the guy could actually get around to the forest, I'm assuming, and to move a permanent or a part-time person into more of a full-time position, and yet they've chosen to plant the trees and drop the truck and the person, and I'm kind of curious how that got prioritized, considering you have a forestry person who can't get to the forest.
The detail is, to start, is on page 41 of what Councillor Height speaks. Mr. Cridlin, response?
Through the chair to Councillor Height, yes, any decisions that SLT makes are a tough decision. And with the pickup truck, it came down to basically cost And working with, or future work with Public Works, Lee Robinson, she can comment if she wishes on this. We're going to look at a model where the forestry guys, due to the nature of their work, they're in fields or in woodlots, that the trucks take a beating, let's say, more so than one down the road. Public Works is working with Community Services. We're hoping, I don't know if it has to be another report, will come forward to council, that hoping to take an older pickup truck that is taken out of service, let's say from Public Works, a high mileager, and that truck could be used for forestry staff because it's going to get the dents, it's going to get the ruts, in the spring when they're out marking for us. So that was why the truck was held back. As far as the part-time staff going to full-time,